Hey guys, what's good? Aka here. In this video, you will learn everything about Resto Druid PvP talents to get a quick start in the arena and catch this season's beautiful elite gear before it's too late. So let's get started. If you're just here to copy and paste, there you go. That's my standard setup for arena, and it works great together with my legendary power, Drought of Deep Focus, and my covenant ability, Adaptive Swarm. But let me tell you that I play mainly 2v2 arenas. This is a very offensive setup with high damage and high single target healing. So you might ask, what might be the alternatives here? And with the power of editing, I divided all of the talents into 3 categories. Red, these talents are not bad per se, they just offer less value than the other choices in the same row, at least at the current patch, with haste and versa being our main stats. And we won't talk about them at all in this video. Green, offering overall the highest value in the most situations, being the best talents compared to alternatives. And orange, that might still work out, like as a niche pick or maybe just being a good choice for beginners. If you have any kind of question, do not hesitate to ask them in the comments below. I promise to answer every single one. This is a quick guide that might not provide all the answers to your questions, so let me help you out. Let's get over the talents real quick before we enter the PvP talents. Ward as only viable choice, offering a lot to our kit. It counts to our mastery, the initial buff can't be dispelled, and it heals for a ton, especially combined with defensive cooldowns like Iron Bark. Level 25 offers us Renewal and Wild Charge. Wild Charge, also an insane talent that also really adds to the playstyle in the arena, giving us a 15-second cooldown mobility ability depending on our form. Alternatively, my recommendation for anyone who feels uncomfortable playing Wild Charge or just started learning Resto Druid, Renewal might be a decent talent, increasing your defensive ability pool without overcomplicating stuff. Level 30 lets us choose between Feral Affinity and Guardian Affinity. Affinity choice comes down to personal preference, current skill level, and matchups. With being high risk but also high reward, Feral Affinity offers us a lot more damage, especially with the fitting legendary power and PvP talents, while also giving us 2 more stuns and more movement speed. If you feel like you lose a lot of games because you die first in arena, I definitely don't recommend taking Feral Affinity. For this, Guardian Affinity is the safer option. It gives you also a new CC ability with Roar that just gives you enough time to follow with a clone. It also offers you more tankiness and a healing ability that costs no mana. Next row, level 35, offers us 3 viable options: Mighty Bash, Mass Entanglement, and Heart of the Wild. I consider Mighty Bash and Mass Entanglement to have higher value than Heart of the Wild. Mighty Bash is my default talent, but I can see people getting in trouble because it is a melee range ability, so you have to put yourself into a risk to get a reward. So I'd say Mass Entanglement, especially versus melees, can also have a high value, especially versus Windwalker monks if you root their clones whenever they have their burst window up, or the pets of a PM hunter when they burst. Like, you can just negate a lot of their damage in burst windows. Heart of the Wild would be my beginner's choice here, and I recommend to combine it with the Guardian Affinity to once again increase your defensive ability pool. Furthermore, I play tested Night Fae with Heart of the Wild, the Night Fae Covenant with Heart of the Wild, which also turned out to be a nice option for meme one-shot builds if you combine it with the Feral Affinity. Level 40 leaves us with one super high value choice, being Soul of the Forest. Every Swiftman, your regrowth or rejuvenation gains extra power, making our overall heal performance so much better. In my opinion, this should not be a talent. It feels so natural once you start playing with it that you'll miss it whenever you spec out of it. So as a more beginner-friendly alternative, I can see Incarnation work. That just gives us another big CD ability to help out performing our clutch shields, but it just lags behind in an overall performance once you can perform decently with Soul of the Forest. Level 45. In my personal opinion, Overgrowth is the only viable option here, but I can see Spring Blossoms work for people that play 3v3 arena with like a melee clave setup. I just don't like play tested it enough to be like super sure about that, so I would give it a dark orange here. Overgrowth used to be a PvP talent I used nearly all of the time back in, I think it's Legion, giving you a mastery healing boost in form of HOTS on the target, so yeah. And finally, level 50. So in this case, both viable talents are like equally great. I guess you can also swap between them, but I'm a lazy person, you know, and I usually don't swap out of Germination, especially because it works with my legendary power, and both rejuvenations get the buff, making it insane amounts of consistent healing, especially with my Adaptive Swarm. Flourish is also really nice, but it doesn't provide the consistency with it being a 1.5 minute cooldown. On the other hand, it's just an insane burst of healing, If you, for example, use it together with Ironbark, Cenorian Ward, Overgrowth, and then into a Flourish, or if you play Necroloid with the Swarm, it's just so much burst healing that counters most, if not all, damage in game, at least for like some seconds, you know. So yeah, I think that's personal preference. Pick either of those and you're good to go. Because I'm tired of editing, we're going to swap back into the game for the last seconds of this video to check out the PvP talents. I have 3 simple rules for PvP talents. First rule is never swap out of Focus Growth. It buffs your Life Bloom. Life Bloom will always be up at a target, right? So this is a great talent, always play it. Second one being never swap out of Thorns as long as you're playing versus melee comps. Thorns has a high damage impact and might force the attacker to swap targets, or even if it just like forces a Purge cooldown, Purge Global, it still has its use. So yeah, go and play it. So now you should ask yourself what will be the exchange talent for Thorns if you're not facing melees, and that leads to our third rule and decision making on the third PvP talent slot. Usually my third slot is filled with Master Shapeshifter whenever I play Feral Affinity and my Drought Off the Deep Focus legendary. It just allows for massive fleet damage and massive damage overall, so if that's not the case, I just swap it out. Same counts for my Thorns talent whenever it feels useful versus the current matchup, right? So we're having a look at all of them real quick, and I try to talk about the useful situations. Disentanglement has its use if you play with melees to get rid of snare effects, but it also lets you lose mana fast. So I can recommend that versus Frost Mages, or Frost DKs, or even Affliction Locks with the legendary powered snares, right? But just keep in mind that spamming a Fluorescence like makes you lose mana really fast. Reactive Resin sounds in theory like super strong, but from playtesting I'm kind of disappointed by it. Also, if your enemies do not really rely on crit stat and they don't crit often, or they just don't crit at all, this like entirely loses all its value. Entangling Bark is like very beginners friendly, I would say. It's just like a nice little buff to our Iron Bark, so whenever you play versus melees, you can totally play that, or versus hunters, like to root the pets. Deep Roots is kind of nice. It works also with Mass Entanglement. I like to play this whenever I play with a mage or with a caster in general versus a melee. So whenever the caster like is going for his burst window, I can just like root the DPS so he can go for it. Or whenever he needs to kite, I can just like keep rooting and my mage can keep casting and damage him and the roots won't instantly break, right? High winds, I like to play this versus, especially versus monks, I would say. Like just cloning them in their burst window so they come out with like 70% of their actual damage, which is still super fucking high, but yeah, 30% less. Early Spring, I don't know, this is like obviously an RBG talent, right? But I was thinking about like a Flourish build in which you would go like Zenorian Ward, Overgrowth, and then into a Wild Growth, into your Swarm, and then Iron Bark, and then Flourish, right? If you play Flourish build. So this would be like 100% more healing of the Flourish, 20% more of Iron Bark, 33% more of Adaptive Swarm, and then like a 30 to 50% healing buff with our Mastery, depending on your Mastery stat, which would be like every tick just heals like, I don't know, full HP. That would just be so overly insane. Maybe I'm trying this and I keep you updated on it, but yeah. It's like an RBG talent, and maybe if you try to meme, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not really playing that. Master Shapeshifter, we talked about that. I like to play it whenever I go for Feral Affinity. Just for the extra bleed damage. Yeah. Guardian Affinity, it's kind of like similar to Reactive Reason. If the enemies do not really crit, or do not really rely on their crit chance, the reduced 10% crit chance is not really helping, right? Mark of the Wild, I like this talent a lot. It has this like retro vibe to it from back in the days. I use that when I know I could get in trouble with purging, right? If the enemy purges down your healing, like gets rid of the target's hots. Mark of the Wild is just an extra buff your target is on that has to be purged, or can be purged together or before, after, whatever, with all the other stuff. So other useful situations would be versus Ely Shamans or Boomkins. Yeah, also nice versus their damage over time effects. Yeah, and with that, we finished the video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub, and I see you on the next one.